I wanted to discuss how to work with the exponential function, f of x equals e to the x, and modifications of that. And one thing I wanted to do is make sure that if you have a calculator, that you're aware how to use your calculator to find these functions values of e to the x. And so what I have is a TI-83 Plus. You have whatever you have, and you need to be able to make sure that you can make your machine find the values that I'm finding. And if you can't make your machine do that, you need to either contact me via some email or maybe look online to see how it is your particular calculator works. Now, this particular calculator, I'll talk about how this works and show how it computes these values. Many calculators, especially these days, many calculators follow a same pattern. Some are slightly different, and I'll discuss those things as we go along. So I'm turned on. The calculator's turned on here. We have typically, and this is true for most calculators, you'll have an ln button on your calculator. In this case, it's right here, ln, natural log. And you'll notice e to the x is the inverse key. This calculator does second. Some calculators has inv, so it's the inverse function, or it's the second button on the second function on that button. So in this case, this calculator, when you push second function and then the e to the x, notice that it opens a set of parentheses for you. It has e, and then the little caret means exponential. Now you can put into this whatever value you like. So if I wanted to find e to the third power, I'd place in 3. You typically would close the parenthesis. In this particular case, it doesn't really matter, but typically you'd close the parenthesis, and when you had equals, you get this long string of decimal values, 20.0855369, and so on and so on. This string goes on forever. It never ends. And so for our purposes, it is sufficient to round. Just use an ordinary rounding rule of 0 through 4 rounds down, 5 through 9 rounds up. And so if I wanted to round this to, let's say, 2 decimal places, it doesn't really matter to me if you round to 2 or 3 or 1 decimal place, just something approximate, and make sure that you show what you're doing so I can find your work. Typically, you want to use either 2 or 3 decimal places, and anytime I ask you to do something, I will explicitly inform you how many decimal places to retain. So let's suppose we wanted to round this to 3 decimal places. We have, see if I can write this so you can see it here. We have 20.0855369, and so on and so on. Suppose we wanted 2 decimal places. Well, this 5 means this rounds up, so we would use 20.09 for our value for e to the third power. All right. You may put a larger expression in the parenthesis. Suppose we wanted to compute e, and we wanted to raise that to the 4/7 power. Well, in this particular machine, that's pretty straightforward. You could simply enter that as is written. You could write second function ln gets e to the x, second function ln, e to the x, and it opens the parenthesis for me. So if I want 4 divided by 7, close parenthesis, then that gives me the value I'm looking for. In this case, if you rounded to 2 decimals, we would use 1.77. This says 1.77079, so on, so on, so on. Round to 2 decimals, we would use 1.77. If you wanted to round to 3 decimals, we would use 1.771, because we would round up the 0 to a 1. And so that's essentially it. Now, some calculators, what you will need to do is put the number first and then hit the e to the x button. Those are usually older style calculators or slightly less sophisticated calculators. This format is becoming more and more common, and most calculators will use this particular format of you hit the function first and then the number. Other calculators, you must hit the number first and then the function. You need to find out what sort of machine you have. If you're using your telephone, if you're using your iPhone or an Android phone to do this computation, my phone, you need to put the number first and then the function. You need to find out how your machine works and be sure that you can find the values that you need. I would recommend getting a little more sophisticated calculator than your phone. But in this particular case, that's the procedure. We hit the function. So if I wanted to find, suppose I want to find e to the first power. If I want to find e to the first power, well, one way to do that, well, there's my e to the x first power, and there's my number 2.71828. So that's the procedure for just evaluating e raised to some power. If I wanted to raise one last bit, suppose I wanted to raise e raised to the negative 0.26. You have to be very careful. So e to the x, and then negative sign, negative 0.26, close parenthesis, and it's 0.77105. Rounded to 2 decimals, we would say 0.77. If you wrote 0.77, that's fine. I would typically just write the 0.77. So that's the procedure for evaluating e raised to some power using a calculator.